I'm muted there. I was muted. Hopefully I'm back and live and chatting away. So welcome everybody to the live stream. It's great to be back. Obviously after missing a week last week, lots of questions pouring in. So I'll get stuck into those. Just a few housekeeping bits and pieces. Before we get going, those of you who are regulars here know the best thing to do is to write the word question, even in capitals, because if you are leaving a question, because that makes it incredibly easy for me to spot if there are questions coming along. And secondly, if you are watching this afterwards, many people watch this afterwards, and this is a live stream, so the entire content is driven by what people ask me. So that's basically the shortened whatever it. In terms of housekeeping, next weekend there will be a live stream, but it will be on Saturday, not on Sunday. And the reason for that is because I will be heading off next Sunday. Let me perhaps bring it up. I'll be heading off next Sunday, but you're flying off to Tokyo. So I'll be on the plane this time next week, flying to Tokyo. I'll be in Tokyo for 4 days exploring, and then I'm getting on Crystal Cruises, which I'm very excited to be able to review and check out, and sailing from Tokyo, Yokohama, down to Manila with Shanghai. So I'm very excited about that. I wanted to book it for a long time. I had it booked for a long time, and I actually chose it partly, as I often mention, is I love going to Asia. I wanted to go back to Shanghai, and there's actually not as many cruises going to Shanghai at the moment as used to, partly because when cruise lines were planning, China was quite slow to open. So it's quite hard to find many cruises to Shanghai, but that's increasing. But also because it's a repositioning cruise as they're moving the ship. It's not as crazy expensive as some of their usual flights. So cruises. So that's that. So let's get stuck into the questions. There's quite a few questions coming in. And as I said, I will try and get through as many of those as I possibly can within the next 60 minutes. So I'll do more or less in the line that the order that they came in. So See the World actually posted this just before going live, and it's around celebrity announcing they're going to river cruising. So if those of you who don't know, you may be as shocked as See the World. So celebrity announced this week that they're going to be entering river cruising. It looks like mostly focused on Europe. They're ultimately going to have 10 ships. So it's a lot more capacity being added because other lines like Viking have also announced new entries. What's not really clear yet is a lot of detail on what they're actually going to be doing. So See the World is asking, who do you think would be their like-for-like competitor? Am I wrong in thinking AMA Waterways? Well, we actually don't really know a lot of detail, so it's purely speculative. But if you look at what Celebrity are operating in ocean cruising, they're kind of in the premium category. And in the premium category, really in river cruising, it's more like Avalon, to a lesser degree Emerald, a little bit of Viking, possibly. Viking's probably a little bit above that. AMA's sort of a bit above that. So you've sort of got the ultra luxury, which is like your Uniworlds and so on. You've got sort of luxury, which I'd probably put AMA Waterways Viking. You've got premium then, which is kind of your Avalons, Emeralds, that kind of stuff. Scenic also being in the top notch. So they're probably going to be more in that area. What we don't really know is how they're going to do anything differently. So I'm really intrigued. So it's very speculative at the moment, but they do talk about bringing a lot of their edge class. And if you think about what Schmidt's edge class is, design, Kelly Hoppen Designs, but also it's a little bit quirky in terms of some of the dining and stuff, because that's one of the limitations, of course, on river cruising is you have very limited dining. So it'll be interesting to see whether they bring ocean stuff like more choice, more flexibility to river cruising, because river cruising is pretty fixed and locked. So that's going to be very exciting to see what they do. And I think they're talking about launching in 2026. I've had quite a few questions on this. My short answer to it is going to be no, but because obviously I have a group cruise for channel members and patrons, which actually leaves on the 31st of January 2026. Miami to San Diego. Mooman 547, Mike and Kerry asking the question, any rumblings from cruise lines about changing Panama Canal itineraries in light of the US President's comments? Hope not for your South American group cruises. So there is nothing, I've picked up nothing. I mean, obviously we have no idea if anything will happen. So I think everyone's working on business as usual and we'll review it. I mean, I mean, you know, the Panama Canal is such a massive, important waterway. Cruise lines need to get their ships through because many of the ships that go through Panama at that time are heading up to Alaska. So I'm sure they'll find ways of making that happen in whatever form that takes. But at the moment, it's purely speculative. And so we have no idea what's going to happen. So no, I haven't seen anything from cruise lines. Haven't picked up anything in terms of alternative planning, because it's quite a massive, if anything happens. But also the Panama Canal, 200 and something cruise lines go through every year. There's hundreds and hundreds of ships go through every day, every week. So it's just so kind of fundamental. So I think whatever happens, there'll be a way that they keep going. Richard, I have not heard anything on this. So he's asking if there's any indication that Oceania will address the soundproofing issues I encountered on Vista when they launched Allura. I've heard nothing. I've seen nothing at all about any changes they're making to the ships. It doesn't mean that there isn't, but I haven't heard anything. And of course, those of you who don't know this, if you ever follow reviews, whether it's on Facebook groups or Cruise Critic or whatever, I had a lot of issues with soundproofing in the cabin I was in. Other people didn't. A lot of, I think, does hinge on what your I'm going to say flatmates, the people next door in the cabin are doing. But you'll see quite a lot of people complaining about noise, largely driven by televisions and so on. So I haven't heard anything, but hopefully they have, because there's certainly a lot of feedback. And the good news is that Oceania is definitely starting to pay attention to feedback. So for example, they have announced that they're going to be replacing Embers back, converting it into a Jacques, and Jacques will be on Allura. So Jacques was the French restaurant that was very popular on the rest of the fleet, but they dropped it when they launched Vista with Embers, which was not very popular. So they are definitely responding to feedback. So they're definitely paying attention to feedback. So hopefully they will be doing something, but I will keep an eye out for that, because it has put me off going to Vista. And I think, as I mentioned in the video, it hasn't put me off going to Marina or Riviera, and I'm actually booked on Riviera at the end of this year for quite a long cruise. Doug asking the question, do you see any issues with cruising to the Greek Isle ports? There are some issues if your itinerary had or has Santorini or Mykonos on, because the government there has restricted the amount of ships that can go to those two ports. So quite a few cruise lines already adjusting itineraries to drop those ports with alternative ports. And there is also some added fees coming into play, which are not as big as sort of the fees that they're talking around in Iceland, where they're talking about every time you go into port, they're adding on fees, or as high as the ones that are going to be rolling out in Mexico, or due to roll out in Mexico in the middle of this year. So slightly smaller fees. So I suspect that the cruise lines might be absorbing those in the short term. So, but we will possibly see some more changes as you start to look at not only this season, but certainly 26 and beyond. I think we're going to see kind of more tweaks, as you like, but particularly for Mykonos and Santorini. So particularly if you are interested in those ports, one of my tips would be is you likely need to focus more on smaller ships if you want to be sure that you'll go there, because it's around numbers of passengers going off. So like many of the places in Europe, they're talking about they don't want the big ships, but certainly I would go smaller, because you're more likely to have any issues. Sorry, I'm hacking a bit, so I'll have a slug. So Tom asking the question, will be on Hamilton Island on the Great Barrier Reef during Australia vacation. It's a magnificent island, very fabulous island, Hamilton Island. And do you have any recommendations for underwater photography? So a couple of things I can suggest, Tom, is GoPros do have waterproof versions. They're particularly good, obviously, for video, but you can also take pictures with those. So that's quite a good option. The other thing is, if you wanted to use your mobile phone, you can buy outer waterproof cases that work. So I have been on some places, in fact, when I was in Galapagos even, a lot of people were using their phones within a waterproof case. Do make sure that you've got one, or you read reviews that it works, because you can actually take pictures with it, because sometimes that doesn't always work. So just look at the reviews for those. Then, of course, if you want to go more high tech or more expensive, the Insta360 is waterproof. That's the one that does the whole 360 thing. The downside with that is it takes a little bit more editing, although the iPhone, or I guess it's an Android app, makes the editing of that footage much easier. But that's quite a good option as well, because it's waterproof, but it is a fairly big investment. And the DJI Osmo Pocket, which is what I use to video a lot of my normal stuff, they do have a waterproof case, but it's not really designed to be waterproof, so it's a slightly clumsy case. Those would be my top tips. If anyone has better tips, please do leave those below. But certainly I have tended for my underwater stuff to use a GoPro. In fact, I don't even have the most recent GoPro. I literally now my GoPro I just use for underwater, and it's pretty good. You've got to be careful if if you're videoing, you need to be careful that it's not kind of all over the place. You need to think about keeping it still. So sometimes some of the extras like little pole and things or grip just forces you to keep it still. If you're taking photography, then that's obviously less of an issue. Expat Dreamer, is it worth to upgrade from Princess Grill to Queen's Grill on the Queen Mary 2? So I'm a little bit biased because for me, the Queen's Grill restaurant across all of the ships is, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, probably the best, if not one of the best restaurants that you get at sea. That's even across ultra luxury ships and beyond. So the menu, the broad menu is the same on Queen's Grill, but Queen's Grill does have more things that you can order off menu, or you can go completely off menu. You can also get caviar, for example, every night at no charge, but there is a charge for if you have it in Princess Grill, quite a hefty charge. Now the key difference is the cabins are much bigger in Queen's Grill because you do move into a more suite sized cabin. So the Q6 is the sort of the most of, the biggest of, and it's quite a nice kind of layout. Obviously you can then go up to penthouse and crazy expensive stuff. So certainly I do really like going Queen's Grill, but the big draw for me really is the whole dining experience, and particularly if you do something like a transatlantic, where the dining experience is really important. And so actually going to the Queen's Grill is very nice. Obviously you're not going to get the money's worth in food for the price difference, so it's more around the experience. Obviously in Queen's Grill you get a butler, but I'm not sure, but I never find a butler necessarily adds a lot. I know some of my friends, they use butlers to set up cocktail parties in their cabin and stuff. We don't do that. But it's more around if you want a bigger cabin and you want the Queen's Grill restaurant, which is just a nudge above Princess Grill. But a lot of the core menu is the same. So it's really around kind of the experience. You'll get the same check-in. It's the same check-in line. It's the grills line with diamond and platinum people. You'll get the same priority embarkation, disembarkation, all that kind of stuff. So it's really around the bigger cabin. You do get a few things, like you can get 2 bottles of booze that you can choose from in Queen's Grill. You'll get canapes every night, that kind of stuff. So it's those kind of things. Jeffrey, cruising for one, I think I've sort of touched on it. And I'm really intrigued to see once they differentiate, because obviously they're pretty limited in the ships. The ships are going to have to be a certain shape. So it's what I'm hoping is they bring more kind of choice to the whole thing. That's what I'm absolutely hoping. Lots of people are talking about, by the way, that today is Groundhog Day, and I just saw someone posting that apparently he saw his, not sure that's going to come out, he saw his shadow, so 6 more weeks of winter. One of my favorite films of all time is Groundhog Day. It's just fantastic. Kathy, hi there, Kathy. I have to change planes in Schiphol Airport next week. I'm by myself and a bit nervous. Is it an easy airport to navigate? So Kathy, Schiphol is enormous. I have only maybe twice in the last 10 years or something actually changed in Schiphol. It is pretty well signposted. Now, the problem is the last time I did, they were doing a lot of building works. So it was a little bit complicated to get around, but that's a while ago. But it is pretty well signposted. But it is quite long distances depending on what you're changing, etc. between. But certainly I've found that, things like Schiphol, even Madrid Airport, those airports which tend to be quite big for chopping and changing of terminals are pretty slick. So you should find all the signage. I can't remember what color the signage is. Like in Heathrow, it's purple, if I remember correctly. I can't remember what color it is, but it is pretty well signposted. But I had quite a long trek. Is all I kind of remember. And Lou saying the same thing. Thanks. So confirming, great signage. So yes, it's pretty good. So thanks for confirming that as well. Steinwald, Madchen, for a small ship, 500 to 1,000 passengers, is 5 days too short to explore the ship. It's a sea day heavy itinerary. So it sounds like you import a lot. I mean, yes and no, I guess. I mean, the advantage you've got if you're on a smaller ship, so if you're talking about 500,000, you're probably talking like, I guess, an Azamara or Oceania R-class ship, or some of the ultra luxury ships, which are about 750. I mean, it is fine because, of course, you have fewer choices of things. So If you're on an Oceania, if you're on the smaller ships, because that's the bigger ships are under. I think you've only got 2, if I remember correctly, specialty restaurants. The same on some of the. If you go to a region, for example, you've got 2 specialty. You've got 2, 3 specialities, plus you've got the Sette Mare plus main dining room. So you could actually literally do one of each every night. So you probably can just squeeze it in, if every night you went to the different restaurants. But there's obviously less choice and stuff. I mean, I'm terrible because I'm really, for me, longer cruises are better, but also because short cruises like that are very hard for me to video. But you'll get a good flavor for it. And the advantage of smaller is you're likely to be able to try most of the venues because there's not loads of bars, there's not loads of lounges. The daily program is not massively packed. So, like there won't be 5 trivias a day. There'll be 1 trivia a day. The show probably will only be 1 show at a certain time at night, not 2 shows in most cases. So you can normally get to see and plan most things. But of course, long trips are always better. Rank is asking the question, I'll be going to Norway in September. Is it true that excursions are more inexpensive if booked in on land, in port, and can you recommend one in Alisund and Stavanger? Thank you. Well, Rank, I mean, what you'll normally find, obviously, is cruise line excursions tend to be on the more costly side because I guess you've got the cost of the provider, plus the cruise line takes a markup with that. So you will tend to find they're obviously more costly, but they do come obviously with benefits because they things like the guarantee to wait for you to come back. The ship will wait they claim they'll wait for you if it's delayed for anything, there's a traffic accident stopping you getting back or something like that. Obviously, often, depending on the cruise line, they may have a cruise line representative. So if there are any issues, they can solve it. They sort of screen the providers. You have more leverage if you have issues. But you're right, in most of the ports, all of the ports in Norway that I've ever been to, so maybe there's some that don't, is you'll normally find you'll have little booths where they will offer different tours. Now, the downside is you don't know necessarily on availability until you get there and what's available. So you may find if there's something you really want to do that you just can't do it because it's not available. So, but there are all of them when you get off in port, there will be little booths there offering similar things that you can do with a cruise line. So in terms of Alisund, I in Alisund have tended to focus on the town. The town is very beautiful. It's a Art Nouveau town, and there's a very nice walk if you're into walking and hiking, where you can hike, and it's quite well signposted right up to the top of this viewing platform. There are some tours that will take you there, but it's quite nice to walk up. I can't remember how many steps there are. Let's say 300 and something. Maybe that's just completely made up. But it's a very nice walk up, great views around, get great views from up the top there. So that's actually quite a nice thing to do. In Stavanger, the town is fine. It's not very interesting. Even the hop on off bus is okay. It's quite good. There's a surprisingly interesting oil museum there. But one of the things I would recommend you do in Stavanger is go off into the fjords. And from Stavanger, you can also go to Pilgrim Rock and stuff like that. So actually, but those things, like if you're going to hike to Pilgrim Rock, that's a full day tour. But you can often get off the ship, for example, they'll do some RIB tours that you can book at the side there, which will whiz you off into the fjords. But actually, you want to go on one of the longer boat trips that take you right into, I can't remember the name, is it I feel like it's beginning with LY, the name of the fjord, where you can go and view Pilgrim Rock and stuff like that. So that's a very nice tour. And you can book those port side as well. But again, if you really want to make sure have a look at the cruise line one. There is a second alternative, which is a midway between that, Rank, which is to look at one of the third-party providers. So, for example, there's a company called Venture Ashore. There's one called Shore Excursions Group. They tend to offer tours which often are smaller groups or will be less costly. So those you can lock up before you go. They normally allow you to cancel 7 days before you get there. So if you change your mind, you can do that. And they also build in guarantees that if for any reason they don't get back to the ship in time because it's freak weather or a traffic accident or something stopping you getting back because of the roads blocked or something, they will get you to the next port at their own cost. So not quite the guarantee that the cruise line does. Now I do have, so I'll put some links. I'll make a note. I'll put some links to those two in the notes of this. So maybe like 5 minutes afterwards, if you want to go in there and have a look at those. I'll actually put an affiliate link. So if you ever want to book tours, it costs you the same as normal, but it helps me get some money to help the channel going. So I will do that. So Steinveld is asking about Mitsu Ocean Cruise. I don't know anything about them other than they exist, which I think are the Japanese line. So I don't know anything other than they exist. So I haven't heard anything on that. So I don't have much more to add to that, unfortunately. But I would like to find out more. Chris asking the question: you recently mentioned that when deciding on itinerary, you limit sea days in favor for more port days. Is that true for any cruise region/time of the year? So it does vary a little bit, but mostly when I'm looking at a cruise, I'm looking at a combination of the experience in the line and the itinerary. So and the ports, should I say, to explore the ports. So it is generally speaking true. Obviously, the exception is when I'm doing a transatlantic, like on Queen Mary book next year. So it's largely true. I'm trying to think if there's any exception to that. If there's a very interesting itinerary that does require quite a lot of sea days, that's fine. If it's getting me to somewhere unusual, but it means you've got quite a few sea days in between, that would be fine. If within the actual spread of it. I do sometimes look at ensuring there's quite a few good sea days if it's a new line that I haven't been on and I really want to explore and experience and get a chance to video it. So for example, I mentioned at the beginning of this, my next cruise is on Crystal, and I booked that because I really want to understand the cruise line and what they've done. So one of the attractions of the itinerary, there was a couple of sea days in there, which also meant that I had time to video and explore, because videoing some of the ship when people are around is easier, and actually just make sure that I could try out everything. So that's sort of a factor. I don't know if I've answered that terribly well, so hopefully that does. So Joel is asking the question: we love watching you, thank you very much. We're going to country hop in Asia this summer. It looked like we need visas during visits to Ho Chi Minh City and Hong Kong. Any recommendations? So Joel, a lot of this is going to depend on your passport and what country you're from. So it's always a bit of a minefield offering those. So for example, coming from the UK, for example, I don't need a visa to go into Hong Kong, and I don't think I need a visa to go into Vietnam. But I think I could buy one when I went in it, if I remember correctly. That's why we bought one. No, sorry, I did need a visa to go into Vietnam. I got it when I got into, but I arranged that you get it when you get to the airport. You buy it in the airport. It was very slow to get it. But the critical thing I would say, Joel, is double check with on your local country travel site. So, for example, in the UK, I would use the Foreign Office site. So it's FCO, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So I would just put an FCO Vietnam, FCO Hong Kong, and that will give me the most recent requirements for a British passport holder. So if you're in the US, the State Department has a really good equivalent site. So you just kind of put US State Department Vietnam entry requirements, and they will tell you the most recent updated requirements. So for example, I'm going to, on that trip I mentioned, I'm going to China, and that told me there that I needed a visa going in. What it didn't tell me, though, which I discovered a little bit later, was that they have got a new visa waiver, which if you're going on a cruise line excursion, the cruise line can apply for that visa waiver for you. But I wanted a visa anyway. I'd much rather have a visa. So sometimes it doesn't have those little nuances. Like it will tell you if you're going into Canada, you must get a Canadian ETA, electronic travel advisor, whatever it's called, ETA. But if you're going only entering Canada on a ship, you actually don't need it. So sometimes it's a little bit off, but generally speaking, the worst case is going to get you to get a visa when you might not need a visa waiver. But for example, when as you saw if you were here at the beginning, my next cruise ends in the Philippines. Now, what the FCO site told me is there's currently a waiver where I don't need to get a visa or an electronic travel advisory or whatever it's called thing. So I would check your site. So if you're in Australia, there's an equivalent. So pretty much every Canada, there's equivalent. That's what I'd absolutely check. But I do remember last time I went to Vietnam, which was you could get a visa, I think before, if I remember correctly, but you could actually do it at the airport, but it was a very kind of slow, slightly frustrating process. I've obviously missed some discussion about HFCs everywhere in Europe, it seems. Oh, KFC, I guess it was KFC. So Monica's in the KFC restaurant in Basel. I haven't had KFC for years. I was actually talking about the other day that I can't remember when I last had a KFC. So the good news is Rhonda was in a penthouse suite, didn't hear a peep, which is fantastic. And hopefully that's because it's good soundproofing, as well as you had very considerate neighbors, which is another thing. So Ron is, this is a point that I have made before, and sorry to hear that this happened to you, but just returned this morning from the Silver Sea Endeavour Antarctic Bridge. I hope you had a fabulous time in Antarctica. Loved the ship. I thought the ship was fantastic. You're right, fog prevented the planes landing on King George Island, so we had to cross the Drake. Fog also prevented us leaving on time. So that's so I'm sorry you had that, and hope you had enjoyed your Drake Passage crossing. But it's one of the things I mentioned in the video, which is doing incredibly well actually, where I talk about one of the risks of the Antarctic Bridge. For those who don't know what it is, it means that you fly from either, in the case because it's Silver Sea, you'd fly from Port Williams. If you're doing do it from a Shire, you can fly from a Shire or whatever, and you fly on these relatively small planes, about 100 something passengers, if I remember correctly, onto King George Island, so you don't have to do Drake Passage. Now, so a lot of people want to do that because they're very nervous about Drake Passage, which maybe I'm fortunate because I don't get seasick, and so I'm a terrible person to say, but I don't think people should worry about it as much. The other advantage is it's a shorter trip because you don't have the 4 days set aside for crossing Drake Passage. However, the risk is that either the runway is too icy or, as you said, fog. So a friend of mine went now 2 seasons ago, and instead of her 6 days, she only got there 2 days into it because the planes couldn't land, so she had a shortened trip. In fact, we got off when we went on Silver Endeavour. The people that were due to join Silver Endeavour on King George Island actually had to fly to Port Williams. So they were coming to Port Williams, but they had to get on the ship in Port Williams because the runway is still too icy for planes to start landing. So you're right, it's a real risk. You just need to bear that in mind if you're doing the Antarctic Bridge. But I hope you enjoyed the Endeavour, and I hope you enjoyed Antarctic Bridge, and that didn't, ruin it in any way. Monica's eating a crispy hamburger, so we're following her KFC experience. So the question that Claudia's got: does anyone have experience with Celebrity Millennium, looking at the India, Sri Lanka, Thailand review send knowledge? So Claudia, I haven't got direct experience, but friends of Mark recently, work colleagues of Mark went on Celebrity Millennium. Last season, they did the Japan thing and they really liked it. But you're right, it is an older ship. And so I did actually, someone dropped me a message last week. They'd been on Millennium and they had then got off Millennium, and they'd actually a couple of weeks later got on to Solstice. And they were talking about how the experience was quite different. And it is quite a different experience. It is kind of an older ship. It has fewer venues and stuff like that. But certainly it is very popular. In fact, I was listening to a podcast this morning, which was an interview with Giles Hawke, who runs celebrity operations in the UK. And he was talking about how Millennium class, but Millennium specifically is very popular with celebrity regulars. But you have to take it with a pinch of salt because obviously he's selling celebrity. But if anyone has tips, I'd love to hear recent experience. I'd love to hear. I would like to try Millennium. They certainly, those friends of Mark really did enjoy it. Andy asking the question: we're doing a Viking Panama Canal cruise on February 17th. Very nice. Love doing that. I've seen recent videos that Viking food is mediocre. Any truth to that? So I've got something stuck in my throat. So let me just do that. I'm not choking because of Viking food. I think a lot of it depends, Andy, where you're reading the reviews. If you're reading the reviews a lot on Cruise Critic, I've become a Cruise Critic skeptic, shall we say. I've seen a lot of, to me, what feels more of a shift negative. I feel like people are posting more on Cruise Critic if they've had a bad experience than people who had an average or good experience. So I feel it's a little bit kind of out of kilter. So one of the things I also try and do to balance that with is also I look at a lot of the Facebook groups. Now, you have to be careful with some of the Viking Facebook groups because some of them are absolute Viking ambassadors, and they won't have a negative word said against Viking. So you sort of have to balance it. Certainly, in my experiences on Viking, which was only a couple of months ago, when I did Alaska, the food was good. I didn't have any issues with the food. I didn't find it mediocre at all, and I thought it was a pretty good choice. So I wouldn't worry about that. But certainly, if you find the experience of it, please let me know, because it's always good to know if there are more recent experiences. But certainly, that hasn't been my experience on Viking. It's not. I don't think there's anything that's changed recently. Let's have a look. Chris asking the question, I live in Belgium. For European itineraries, I typically go to Rotterdam for Holland America or Southampton for Princess. Often why premium lines do not embark in Antwerp or in, I guess, Bruges. I'm guessing, Chris, that this is very much around the infrastructure. Just and partly you'll tend to find that most cruise lines will need obviously a supply chain infrastructure that's sort of established, ideally, if they are, because the embark and disembarkation is used where they load the ship up with supplies. They will often offload stuff that needs to be recycled, glasses, tin, all that stuff. They refuel there, etc. So it's quite a big, so you sort of need a bit of an infrastructure or an ability to do that. Also, they tend to focus on ports which either have a big catchment area or have a major international airport, so that people flying in can do more direct flights and stuff. So they want a big hub airport. So that's, I suspect, comes into play. And maybe they would not see those as major draws. Certainly, I guess Bruges is particularly popular with UK travelers, particularly at Christmas time. And you don't really see Antwerp very often on itineraries, so that could be a factor. But I think that's why they're looking for big ports with big infrastructure and which can cater well. You need lots of hotels of varying prices, all that kind of stuff, I think, sort of comes into play. Carolyn, you might have posted this before I mentioned this, but certainly I will be able to tell you that quite soon, because I'm heading off to Crystal. So I'm embarking Tokyo on the 14th. So I am very excited, because certainly friends of mine have been on Crystal, spoke very highly of it, and feel in some ways it's almost, they've even added to what it was before they kind of closed down. So Abercrombie Kent added to. So I will know much more. Some people that follow me, I've been following them. They're on Crystal at the moment and have been very, very positive about it. So that's very, very exciting. Let's have a look. Laurel talking about on a recent Holland America cruise, because the TV in the next room, they got it turned off. This is the first time I had an issue. So it's good to know that they dealt with it, because television seems to be the one problem area. If I ever have a noise problem, other than the time I had on Vista, was really it's often around the television, that even on my seaborne cruises and other bits and pieces like that. So so let's have a look. Just remind to write the word question if you've got a question, so that I don't miss it. So I just spotted one there that Mark has posted. Thinking about booking a 7-night Inside Passage Alaska cruise, Holland America in September. What are the plus and minus for that time of year? So Mark, I do also have a couple of videos where I probably dive into it more in case I've forgotten anything. But certainly the plus, I would say, of September is you just sort of past the manic peak season. So July, August, obviously with school being on vacation, most of them go back in September. So you'll find that you're probably going to have the ships kind of slightly less manically busy, because even Holland America in the Alaska season attracts lots of families, lots of multi-generational families. So the ships are very full, because you've got lots of kids sharing parents' cabins. So it's quite a boisterous, loud experience versus the normal Holland America experience. A lot of kids on board, and the same would be of Princess. So it's just past that period, particularly if you've taken something after whatever it is, Labor, I always get which way the holidays are around. But if you take it after the schools, kind of the schools and things have gone back, you're probably going to have a slightly less busy kind of ship. It's Alaska rains all the year round. I think May is probably the least amount of rain, so the chance of that, it's obviously starting to shift a little bit cooler, but that's fine. You can deal with that. But I think it's generally going to be slightly less busy. So in terms of availability of excursions, that kind of stuff, the ports should be a little bit less busy. They'll still be very busy, I think in terms of wildlife, it's still good because the salmon run, I think the salmon run is still on in September. So, wildlife and bears come out. I need to check that. In terms of minuses, I don't think there's a lot of minuses. It's still going to be pretty busy. I like going at the beginning, the May, June time. But I would say that September, once you get into October, it starts to get much colder. A lot of the cruise lines used to sort of end the season in September because we're sort of get cold, days a bit shorter, that kind of stuff. But I think it's probably more upsides than downsides overall. I think I've answered Joel's question, so that's good. On the thing, Cruising for One's got a suggestion. That's a good point, actually, looking at things like eBay for underwater cameras. So that's a good idea. I hadn't thought that one. I'm not familiar with that one, but that's probably right. There's some quite nice ones. So those are the yellow ones. I've seen some of those. Cruising Bird. What line would you suggest for an Alaska cruise? And do you feel less motion as you travel the Inside Passage? Thank you, from Claire. So Claire, one of the things I say, and I do dive into a little bit in one, if you just have a search on my channel, Alaska, you'll find a bunch of videos there. But what I tend to suggest when I recommend people, particularly if they're going for the first time to Alaska, is focus on lines and itineraries that go into Glacier Bay, because there's only, I think it's 7 cruise lines have the ability to go into Glacier Bay. So every 10 years or something, that's put up for kind of, I guess, bidding, and the authority, the park authority, whatever runs Glacier Bay, will allocate those. So for example, Holland America, Princess, Norwegian, they tend to be fairly consistent going in there. Not all the Norwegian ships will go in. Obviously, not all the Holland American ships will go in there. I think at the moment I'm writing saying that Seabourn, Cunard, and Viking have some of those slots as well. So do have a look at those, sort of focus on those sort of lines. And I strongly suggest you choose an itinerary that includes Glacier Bay. It is really incredible and magnificent. If you don't go to one, they'll go to other, glacier areas. But Glacier Bay, you've got those glaciers kind of packed in there, and it's just absolutely magnificent. It really is wonderful. So I'd focus on those. Holland America and Princess have been there the longest, so they have the longest experience. You'll find some of those sort of long existing lines, they tend to get the slightly better locations in the different ports. They'll just have the better moorings and stuff overall. But that's not a massive thing, I guess, to choose a line. Now, in terms of the Inside Passage, that is the calmest part usually of the experience, because you are between. Do I have an Alaska one up here? I actually have you won't be able to see it because I have an Alaska. One of my cruise maps at the top there is Alaska, but I don't think it's going to work. But basically, you're right, because you're sailing, as James suggests, between sort of land masses, so it does tend to be pretty calm. But if you're going, you can have slightly more bumpy stuff if you're going through kind of the bigger, more open space. So you're right. Generally speaking, you might have a little bit of movement and stuff when you get out of the Inside Passage, but generally speaking, should be a slightly kind of calmer sort of experience. So hopefully that answers that. Let's have lots of discussion around Disney Wonder. I'm assuming it's a discussion, not a question. So let's make sure. Lots of interest on what celebrities offering. Karen asking around, there's some discussion around sea days there. I think it was an answer to someone's question. Here we are. Claude, what are the cruise lines that are not owned by the USA? As avid Canadian cruisers, we try to boycott American product from the tariffs imposed by Canada by the USA. Well, basically, if you're looking for, when you say not owned by the USA, I guess you mean companies that aren't listed in the United States, is I guess what you're saying, because so they're not owned by US shareholders. So that's the key thing, because in reality, none of them are true US companies, you could argue, because the ships are, other than their operating things. But I know what you're saying. Anyway, so basically, you need to then not look at any of the Carnival Corporation lines, any of the Royal Caribbean lines, or any of the Norwegian lines. Plus, there's obviously smaller lines with names like American Cruise Lines, Margarita at Sea, and so on. So if you take a look at, so straight away you need to exclude lines like P&O and Cunard, because they are part of the Carnival Corporation. So even though they're UK lines, they're part of the corporation. So the biggest non-US line, if you look at the big rankings of line, is MSC Cruises. So that's the biggest. Then you've got Crystal, I guess, because Crystal is owned by Abercrombie and Kent, which is more, I think I'm right in saying more UK, Europe based. Then you've got smaller lines like Fred Olsen. You've got Ambassador in the UK. So it's mostly kind of UK lines. You've got Ponant, which is French as well. But bear in mind, even if you looked at things like Mein Schiff, Tui, Marella, they are 50% owned by Royal Caribbean, which of course is ultimately a US stock thing. So if you want to look at Hapag-Lloyd, for example, seems very German. However, it's 50% owned by Royal Caribbean. So MSC is the biggest. Ponant, which is French, and in the UK you've got like Fred Olsen and Ambassador. So there's not very many, is the short way of answering it. Crystal, I need to double check, but I think I'm right in saying Abercrombie Kent is listed in the UK, but don't quote me on that particular one. Oh, Hetty's here. Fantastic. So Hetty is on this wonderful, I think it's 73, 78 night, if I remember correctly, no longer than that. It's right through till May, like this massive, great big, big circle, sort of going all around from South America and so on. What's it called? I'm not explaining it very well. Anyway, she's going on a big, massive, big Holland America Grand Voyage, I guess it's called. So Lake Gatton in the locks, which is fantastic, to the other side. So have a fabulous trip. So you'll be heading the way that the group cruise is going, I guess, towards the Pacific. So glad you're having a wonderful time, and you're on a nice small ship, so it gets to be magnificent. So I'm great you could join. That's fantastic, because I know we're not never sure with all the Wi-Fi and the time difference that you can join. So thanks for joining me in the canal. Amy, I'm going on Silver Sea to Australia. I usually tip after an excursion, but you said Australians didn't like, or however do I do after excursions for tipping, or don't you? Amy, it's the Australia point is more that so in Australia, tipping is not part of the culture. So the guides will not be expecting a tip. So, if you go on, a tour in the Caribbean or in the US or whatever, normally, the guides will often pretty much say, if you enjoyed us, leave us a tip. You won't see that in Australia. Now, no Australian is going to turn down a tip, obviously. So if you do like and prefer to tip an Australian guide, feel free to do that. I didn't really when I've been in Australia, I don't tend to tip just because it's kind of not what people kind of expect. So I haven't really, but that's more I've been on land-based and on the train. So we did actually, when we were on the Indo-Pacific train, for example, we did tip the people there because we just thought they were fantastic. And of course, they were very happy to take a tip. So it's just not Australians, it's just not part of the culture. So it won't be as overt. But certainly we did. So when I just contradicted myself, because we most of our Australian stuff I've done is kind of land-based, and we haven't done a lot of tours. But when we did in the Pacific, we were there with 4 nights. So when we did absolutely tip the cabin attendant who makes your bed and does all that sort of stuff. Sophia asking the $64 billion question probably. Do you think more sustainable green ships will come in the future? I mean, they have to. There will be some pressure. What form they will take, I don't know. We are seeing some developments. So in Norway, with the Havalia line, they have hybrid ships. Hurtigruten has some hybrid ships. Ponant has got some concept ships, and so does Hurtigruten, with these big sort of solar panels and all sorts of things. But they tend to be at the moment much smaller lines. The big cruise lines are focusing more on LNG, and there is some talk, like the aviation, of more biomass kind of things. I think we will see it over time, but I personally don't feel there's a massive fast push. There seems to be more focus on like LNG, plugging in ports instead of running ships in ports to improve the air quality in ports. For example, one of the reasons I've just remembered, for example, that there's more limitations on ships going to Shanghai, apparently, is that they require ships to plug into power, but they don't have a lot of capability yet. I'd read that somewhere. So again, I'm reading what I read rather than giving as gospel. So I think there's a lot of emphasis being put on improving recycling, going slower to burn less fuel, for example. stuff like that, rather than, I don't see it, and I see some of the smaller lines experimenting more. I'm sure underneath all this, the big shipbuilders must be looking at the solution, must be looking at some options, should I say. Patricia, I booked a land and sea Greek Islands cruise in 2026. Avalon appears to be the cruise company. Do you have any feedback on Avalon Greece? So Avalon is at the moment only in river cruising. I don't think they've launched any ocean cruising. So I don't. I would just check if that's Avalon. So if it's Avalon, it's not the Avalon that I know, because Avalon are river cruises in Europe, but in the kind of the Central Europe, it's sort of Germany, Austria kind of area. So I don't know that it's Avalon. So maybe you can just check that and let me know. But I'm pretty sure they haven't gone into ocean cruising. If they have, I've really kind of missed it. Rod has a question. I'm off on Queen Mary 2 in October doing the transatlantic crossing, but going both ways. Very nice. Are the themes for gala entertainment speakers the same both ways? Okay, so massive big change, Rod, is Cunard have scrapped the gala evening themes from, is it April or March? I can't remember the exact date, but they've scrapped them. So they no longer have the Roaring Twenties or the black and white. They literally just have gala night with a kind of, gents at least in a suit, ladies sort of in a cocktail dress, but, slightly less. They still have the formal nights, but they don't call it formal night anymore. Gala nights, they call it, but they don't have the themes at all. So there will be no themes either way. In terms of the speakers, Rod, normally they would have different speakers on the two legs. Normally they take speakers one way and different speakers on the way back, partly because they're giving, most of the speakers don't get paid to be on the ship. They get a kind of a free transit, if you like. So they don't take them one way, and also because of the point that people doing kind of back-to-backs. So I'm sure there must be examples where speakers have been both ways, but if they do have the same speakers, I would say 99% sure they will give talks on different topics, but they normally have different speakers. In terms of the entertainment, they will normally have different guest entertainers, because they'll bring guest entertainers for one way, different guest entertainers for the other. But you're right, the actual production shows will be the same. So you'll find much of that is the same both ways. So those will be the same, but the guest entertainers will normally be different. So there will be enough of difference, because it's basically only the production shows that will be the same. But that's the same as like when we were on a 7-week trip from Southampton, down through the Panama Canal, Hawaii, blah blah blah, and the production shows were the same. But every leg they would change everything. They would keep changing the speakers, and they would keep changing the guest entertainers. Let's have a look, Greg. I think this is a question. Let's have a look. Can you please discuss about Silversea Classic cruises? My mum and I are going on Silversea Silver Shadow on March the 13th for 13 days around French Polynesia and the Cook Islands. So Greg, one of the things, and I'll put a link in this, so certainly, whoops, I took that off as I did that. I will put a link to my Silversea video. So maybe 5 minutes after this, I'll put a link there where I'll dive into in much more detail. But the critical thing with Silversea is obviously then the ultra-luxury space. There's a lot of things included. So you probably know this already, your specialty dining, with one exception, Silver Note, is included. You will have a butler no matter what grade you're in. You can have as much caviar as you like. You can ask caviar in your cabin. You can ask caviar for dinner. They're very liberal with it. The entertainment is pretty good. Silver Shadow, I don't think they don't have, I think I'm right in saying they don't have the SALT program yet on Shadow, but the SALT program is something they have on their newer ships, so you're probably not going to have the cooking demonstrations and that sort of stuff. But you'll find it's very, it's all very inclusive. You'll have the butler service. You'll find the dress code is relatively, people do dress up more. Of the ultra luxury lines between Silversea, Seabourn and Regent, those three, I find Silversea passengers tend to dress up a bit more. So I would probably take more smarter clothes. So you've got your jacket and stuff like that, because people do dress up way more than they do on Regent. Certainly in my experience, and I expect to find on Crystal's probably even a notch above that. They certainly seem even stricter. The excursions, of course, as you should know, are all included. So hopefully you've gone and locked those in, because they go very quickly. So if you haven't, I would log on to your customization and make sure that you've got your excursions locked down, because they do go really quickly. That is a fabulous itinerary. As I said, Greg, I will leave a link to my Silversea video. It's quite a recent one, where I'll just dive in a bit more, probably give you a little bit more stuff that I haven't really thought of. Let's have a look. Lots of good chat to and fro, which is good. Cherry, let me just bring this a point here. So remind me when the ESTA, in fact, the UK is called an ETA, but it's the same difference. It's required for Americans, even just transiting through the UK. Is it May the 1st? So if you're from the US, you need an ETA now. That's in place now. However, they have scrapped the need to have it for transiting. So you're right, if you were just going through Heathrow, changing planes, originally it was announced that you would need the ETA. They dropped that about 2-3 weeks ago now, maybe even less than that. So you don't need it if you're transiting. The only thing I would say is it is probably worth, in my view, having it, because if there's an issue and you need to, excuse me, sorry, if you do need to, I don't know, there's a problem with the flight, you need to go and stay in a hotel, you need an ETA to leave the airport, as it were. Now, the ETAs you can apply for. There's an app, which I think strongly encouraging you to use the app rather than online. So personally, if I would get it anyway, it's, what is it, £7, £10, and it lasts for 2 years or something. But you don't need it anymore. If you are in an EU country, that's when it's clicking in later. I think you're right, it's the May the 1st thing. But certainly from the US and so on, you need it now is the key. Bob asking the question, Rion Splendor, very nice, repositioning August December to Montreal. Specifically for Madeira, do you have a recommendation for a tour, even to be independent of Regent? So the most popular thing, Bob, to do in Madeira is the tour that takes you up the hill, where you go down the hill on these wicker baskets, which these guys on the back steering down. That is the most popular excursion. You'll find lots of I don't know if Regent offer that as one of their included ones, but you'll find that many people offer those. So whether you look at Viator or Venture Ashore, or probably when you get off the ship, you can do it. You can probably even get a taxi to take you up there, but the waiting lines can be very long. So some of the advantage of a tour is you might find you can, they've scheduled timing, so you don't wait as long as if you go independently. That is the most popular thing to do, if that appears. It's sort of like, it's an iconic thing to do in Madeira. I'm sure there are many others. I've done some cycle tours in Madeira, done some self-exploring, wandering around in Madeira. But those ones, if anyone has better suggestions, then please do pop those in. Let's have a look. I'm hoping I'm not missing any questions. Asking, I'll give Carnival a try. I will give Carnival a try. I want to give Carnival a try in the Caribbean, because I know lots of vloggers and stuff, particularly in Europe, they've done them, say, out of the UK or whatever. And for me, that's fine, but it's not Carnival's real buzz. Its real thing is about the Caribbean. So I want to do one that's in the Caribbean. So at some point when I next do a Caribbean, I will certainly, kind of lock that in. Nicholas, my girlfriend and I are both in our early 20s. We want to book a luxury, smaller ship cruise like Regent or Silversea. Which cruise line do you think would be best to try and not be out of place? So basically, Nicholas, I mean, as a couple in your early 20s, you'll be way younger than anybody on board, for sure. However, if you do look at booking on any of these, generally, if you look at going in the sort of the summer periods or time when there is holiday, so over Christmas time, summer holidays, you're more likely to get either sort of families or multi-generational families on board. So, for example, when we did Regent to Panama Canal, there were, there was some younger people there, but not a lot. So you do need to be clear that you're probably not going to meet lots of 20-somethings, even 30-somethings to party with or whatever. That's not going to happen. In reality, I would probably actually lean a little bit towards Seabourn. Seabourn tends to get a sort of more eclectic crowd of people overall, in my experience. So I would actually look at Seabourn. I would also, though you want to go on, your Regent Silversea is sort of ultra luxury. I would also take a look at lines like, so Oceania, Azamara, and Windstar. So they're not quite the ultra luxury level, but they're luxury level. They're smaller ships. They do tend to get, again, a much wider range of people. So, for example, Windstar, they even have the sailing ships. They will tend to people very focused on destination, very much about exploring, quite active and stuff like that. Again, not party ships. None of these are going to be party ships. So if you're looking for discos and stuff, it's going to be very hit and miss. But that would be my thoughts on those. Zombie Tog. What's the camera used with a stick? I booked Oceania to South Pacific thanks to your videos of time presence to myself. Well, fantastic. So actually we're doing, depending on when you're going, you might see on this. So we booked on Marina Riviera from Sydney to Papeete. So you may be on a similar one, or you maybe do the one that heads up to Hawaii as well, which I'd love to do. So to answer your question, the camera on the stick, it's called an Insta360, and it comes, you can buy a little package which has what's known as the invisible selfie stick. Unfortunately, I don't have the camera here, but I will put a link. I'll put a link. I've got lots of links to put in today. I'll put in a link to the Insta360. It's an Insta360 X3. It's a tiny little thing. It's about that big. And it has a lens at the top, lens at the bottom. Then the selfie stick attaches. And what happens is where the camera merges the images together is where the stick is. So the stick disappears. So it's very clever indeed. So that's what it's called, an Insta360 X3, which I think is the most recent. And you buy the selfie stick separately, or you can buy some packages. So I'll put a link which shows you the one that has the package as well. And enjoy that cruise. It will be fantastic. So Oren, I just realized, has left a super chat, I think it's called. Thank you very much for that. Do smaller ships have access to more exotic ports? Well, certainly, Oren, they do absolutely have the ability to go into ports that bigger ships can't do, number one. So yes, absolutely. And secondly, increasingly, as you might have heard earlier, is a lot of ports are starting to, or some ports are starting to stop bigger ships going in. So there's a couple of, I covered in a recent cruise, but in Iceland, Valencia, we just heard from Nice, for example, they're all talking about only letting smaller ships in, not letting bigger ships in. So also some ports that are big ships used to go to are maybe closed to smaller ships. So absolutely they will go to ports that others can't do. So for example, if you go to the Greek Isles, for example, on a smaller ship, you'll go to many islands that the bigger ships just won't go to, because they can go up there and they will contend passengers, take them on the tender boats, which a big ship is just too much of an operation. So for example, when we did Seabourn on a small ship, or even I've done Azamara, because it's much smaller, the islands were happy to have, because there's only maybe 300-400 people, 500 people getting off the ship at most. So the island can absorb that on one day. So we went to many islands some islands I'd never even heard of really before, because they were that kind of small and out of the way. So that's key. Steinvolt Machin has a question on the train, which I love. Do you think the Indian Pacific between Adelaide and Sydney worth doing? Again, Indian Pacific back-to-back seemed to make better sense returning from East Coast last month. So I mean, the Indian Pacific, to experience it between Adelaide and Sydney is great. You've only got the one night on board. I just saw actually a recent cruise blogger based in the US, in Australia, did it recently. Cruise Travel Guy, I think it's called, if I remember his channel. It's great, but it's very short, so you're only going to get a flavor for it. But doing the whole thing was fantastic. But I see what you want to do. You want to do the GAN and then do the Indian Pacific. So I would definitely, if you're doing that, the GAN down from Darwin to Adelaide, and then Adelaide to Sydney on the Indian Pacific would be an amazing experience. Definitely, absolutely would be fantastic. Let's have a look. We're running out of time quickly, but let's have a quick look. Excuse me. in my throat again. Life's adventures. Do you and would you advise that the travel agent who books your cruises also books your overseas flights and pre and post accommodation if applicable? So the short answer is generally yes. So one of the advantages, and it depends where you're booking, but the advantage is it's all linked in some way. So for example, in the UK, travel agent Sarah Bolton can often, if she does everything, she can do it as a package. So if one of the elements kind of gets cancelled, so say the cruise gets cancelled, because they're all linked, they can all fall within that package and they'll be cancelable and refundable and all that kind of stuff. So the advantage is if one thing goes wrong, you have one point of contact. So I have been on cruises where if something's gone wrong, so for example, I have used before, but I was booked on a Oceania Panama Canal cruise, which is going from Panama City to Miami. And I booked it all through Sarah, the flights, the hotel, even the transfers actually, and the cruise and so on. And what happened is literally about 10 hours before, something like that, not long before, the flight was cancelled. So the advantage I had is I could literally get hold of Sarah and say, the flight's been cancelled, sort it out. And so she had to then find a rerouting to get me there, which actually I know cost more than my flight, but because they had now a commitment to get me there, I didn't have to pay the difference. Where if I'd done it myself, I'd have to find my own flight, possibly pay the difference, maybe not, depending on the cruise line, the airline. But then she was able to then shift everything. So she then dealt with shifting the transfers, got the hotel no. So there was kind of the sense of smoothness. So it's particularly handy from that perspective. Now the downside, which is what I sometimes wrestle with, is with the accommodation. If you are a person that is very keen on collecting points, so I'm obsessively like to collect points. I like to always stay at the Intercontinental because I'm an ambassador member, I have very high status with them. I don't want to lose that status. Now, if I book an ambassador, an Intercontinental hotel through the travel agent, you don't get the points. So it means that I potentially lose status, which I don't want to do. And then some of the perks you get from status I still get. So if the upgrades and stuff, I still get those, but the points I don't get. So that's one of the considerations. Now in the US, not yet rolled out, but there was a move, and I think this is coming to place, where if flights are booked on certain airlines, and you need to check if you're in the US, if that applies, but some of the airlines were not giving you your air miles or whatever it's called if you'd booked through a third party, if you hadn't booked with them directly. So again, for me, when I was obsessed about points, if that happened, I would always book flights myself. I wouldn't even book them through the cruise line. So sometimes I book flights through cruise line, through the travel through cruise lines. Sometimes I book them with the travel agent. So it's a little bit pick and mix, and certainly when its status is really important. Like if, for example, I always travel One World because I want the points and the air miles and so on. If BA stopped doing that, I would probably book myself, to be honest, because I'm obsessed. If you're not less obsessed because you don't travel as much, then it's less of an issue. If you're not going to get the status, then it's a little bit less. So, right, we've churned through the time. I hopefully haven't missed out many other questions. Sorry, Kathy's added one more. Saga, that's another, is a non-UK one. I knew I was missing one. Saga is another one for coming back to the person who's looking for non-UK. Saga is more challenging to book as a non-UK person, but you may struggle with that. But if you speak to a travel agent, or even if you speak to maybe travel agent Sarah, she may be able to help you with that. But I think it's more challenging. Certainly it was almost impossible at one point, and maybe I'll check with travel agent Sarah if it's now possible. So thanks very much. Absolutely, thanks very much for joining. Sorry if I didn't get a chance to answer your question, but I will be back, as I mentioned, on Saturday, not on Sunday. And I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great, great week. And thanks for joining me.